So obviously Jim's not here, he bailed on me. But good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to first pay my respects to the Algonquin people, the traditional custodian of the land on which Carleton University campus is situated, and from where I live and work in Saskatoon, which is Treaty 6 territory and the homeland of the Métis. There's a lot of COVID talks out there. I think we've had a few at Access in previous years, including one or two of the kind of, we created an archive kind of talks. I think Aaron Wolf's Documenting Crisis was one in 2022. Of course, my glasses are fogging up. I'm going to focus mostly on the sort of emergent or urgent archive response and our way of handling it. And it's much to do with the sort of web archiving side of things, mostly. There are some issues here that are not unique to the pandemic, but they sure highlighted a few things during that time, and hopefully some are applicable to your situation. There we go. I'll start with a bit of background, discuss some partnership and collaboration challenges we had, and move into more of the sort of specifics and what we're up to next kind of scenario. So hopefully this won't be another how we coped or are coping with COVID type conversation, but we'll get into more of that. Like many of us who are concerned with how the pandemic would play out, the project started mostly as an attempt for me to gather as much as I could early in 2020. It evolved into a bit more of a research focus when Erica Dick and Jim Clifford got on board. They're both history profs at USask. And this brought sort of different approaches, research groups, support structures, and resources into the mix over the couple of years that we've been working together. I started, I guess, simply by just trying to catch as much as I could and archive it. And I, to be honest, didn't have a ton of experience with that. And so some of the scoping and just working with the tool took a bit of time to kind of get dialed. Also worked on scraping tweets from Twitter, like Scott Moe, Charlie Clark, the Saskatchewan Health Authority among them. I focused on Saskatchewan mostly because I wasn't sure it was all being captured. We had some conversations with provincial archives, and I knew there was a few national initiatives getting some stuff, but we weren't sure how much and how deep. And once Jim and Erica were involved, we kind of had a lot of discussions about what we would get and what we would exclude, I guess. So again, scoping was a big issue. Also brought on Tim Hutchinson at that time as well, who is our university archivist, mostly to kind of keep us in check and help us manage the archive collection. I should also add that Brock's project, COVID-19 in Niagara, was on my radar. They were doing such a good job at setting up that site early in the pandemic. Got a lot of press, and many of you probably know Tim and Cal, among others, who worked on that project. It was definitely an inspiration in terms of getting community contributions, and our projects teams would later kind of come into contact a bit more during the Archives Unleashed work, but I'll talk about that a bit more later. So early in the pandemic, we built a website where members of the community could upload material, and sort of reflect on their experiences during the pandemic. We received some media attention, and there was a bit of there's a few submissions early on, but it kind of, I think COVID fatigue set in and the project went dormant for much of 2021. Early in year 2, I guess, like right around then, kind of conference or grant season, we kind of received some more funding. So we a project called Remember and Renew was an interdisciplinary project funded by 2 grants, one from SHRC and one from CIHR. And this expanded, obviously, the team quite a bit. And the gist of it was to try to learn lessons from the COVID-19 response in Saskatchewan. The CIHR project created a population survey focused on substance use, mental health, and food and housing insecurity. And the SHIRK project began work on archiving community partners' works and documents and interviewing leadership. Jim Clifford and I applied for Archives Unleashed grant to start exploring the web archive, or to sort of kickstart and help us get going on the web archiving side of things. So overall, a pretty eventful couple of years, despite not having a ton of time to kind of devote to the work. We did find ways to kind of automate, get students involved, and find some funding to get things going. So as I see it, though, there's a few key challenges. I'm taught to say challenges and not problems that we would like to learn from. I'm taught to say learn from and not sort of get swamped by or dwell on. But many of them are sort of general challenges around archiving content and creating collaborative digital projects in a fast-moving context. So essentially, we're really slow. We're slow to react to these kinds of things. Archival work, especially at academic institutions, maybe not especially, government as well, and others. The sort of grant funding, the group decision-making, tool building, learning, all not super fast unless you have policies and procedures and expertise all sorted out kind of beforehand. And then two, like the information is not slow, it's fast, it's super fast. Twitter, Facebook, online news releases, that sort of thing. It's basically a Max Verstappen versus Gia the house cat sort of situation. So we didn't get overly involved. This is another problem in the sort of national web archiving initiatives at the time. We were kind of, again, overwhelmed a bit and just trying to do what we could do. That would have helped. And also just, again, the time was an issue. We were all doing this off the side of our desks and had other concerns during the early part of the pandemic. Sorry, I'm going to go back. So the scale of it was also something we were unaccustomed to. We're used to working, I guess, on fairly big projects, digitization projects, that sort of thing. And dealing with web archiving on a smaller scale. But we had, I think currently it's around 2.5 terabytes of data, 34 million documents. And these numbers, maybe a bit inflated with some overlap, but still, it's a pretty big collection to deal with. And then we had to deal with different scales. So we have, along with this, we have smaller curated archives of, 3,000-ish news stories, smaller yet archives from community organizations, and even smaller sort of oral history collections that we're developing. So it's a real mix of content sizes, which brings about their own set of challenges. We also had issues around, I guess, exactly what the role of the librarian, the role of the archives in the library, and the role of the Digital Research Center are. Some of these are unique to the COVID situation, and others are just, simply an organization challenge, a collaboration challenge. So the community contributed content is different from other archival collections we've worked with. We didn't, go through the typical accessioning, donation, all that kind of stuff. And I think that left Tim with a little bit of anxiety, and we had to kind of figure out a way to kind of, again, react and get some of this self-submission stuff going. And more questions surfaced about how the collaboration would work, who's responsible for what, and that sort of thing. We had to concern ourselves with active research of epidemiologists who were working on the team, and the goal in creating an archive to support future research beyond the sort of narrow goals of that CIHR grant. Getting back to the DRC, though, we were useful in a few ways, I guess, and that was, I guess, comforting for some of us. It was good for, knowledge translation and communication, connecting programmers, archivists, digital librarians with subject matter researchers, and so that was helpful. We have, infrastructure. So we were able to get a website up relatively quickly and because of our sort of existing Drupal infrastructure, which we'll talk a little bit more about tomorrow as well. And then we had a dedicated programmer, sort of, Emmett, who's here, who is, was there to kind of help us with a few introductory issues with Solr search tools and helping refine Twitter scraping and that sort of thing. I'll jump back. So the ongoing work. So kind of what's happening now is, I guess, in the summer we had 10 students, which was great. We had 10 students working sort of part-time, and they created Zotero collections of 3,000 news stories-ish on the COVID-19, in Saskatchewan, and worked through creating metadata, tagging them, that sort of thing. And they also conducted some oral interviews, and they looked at the challenge of Facebook, which I'll talk more about. But initially what was involved there is simply grabbing as much content using Web Recorder and other tools. So that, that work is all being gathered together with the hope of one day coming together under one project. I'll skip ahead actually. So getting lost here. We're currently updating the website, hiring students to help solicit materials and interviews from community organizations. So that's kind of an ongoing thing. And we're gathering documents from different frontline organizations, food banks, nurses unions, that sort of thing, nurses union. As restrictions relax, the frontline workers in some sectors shifted from crisis to burnout, and the need to collect impressions and experiences became more urgent. In Saskatoon, the interagency task force was formed to manage the pandemic between dozens of organizations like the food bank, shelters, and safe consumption sites. This group is in the process of disbanding, and the leadership is sort of dispersing into new roles. And so we thought that it was important for us to collect these records before they're lost. Facebook. So here's, again, another challenge, which I'll get to one of Jim's questions about how Facebook versus Twitter is operating. So as many of you likely know, Facebook doesn't play nice with the Internet Archive. But it's very much the site of much public debate about COVID measures. Again, we're using tools to kind of try to capture some of that. It's very labor intensive, and the automated crawls don't do super well with this. This was one area where Scott Moe and public comments sort of crept into a lot of his posts, and there's a lot of interesting stuff there that we would like to make sure that we're capturing. I mentioned some of the challenges, such as getting the crawls to capture what we wanted, and some of the redundancy and the sheer size. This is a pretty common problem. We're getting a lot of stuff, and we don't have a lot of time, and we need to organize it, all that kind of thing. Thankfully, with the SSHRC funding and Archives Unleashed project, it's giving us a bit of an opportunity to test out the collection and the tools and see what we can do around organizing some of it. In April, we found out our proposal for the Archive Unleashed team cohort was successful. I believe maybe Sam Fritz presented here in 2019 about some of what's going on with Archives Unleashed, but it's essentially a project that has created tools for librarians, archivists, and researchers to discover, explore, and analyze web archives. And the project uses a sort of cohort model. So there's a couple of us, of the teams going through, they meet together and discuss like problems. I'm gonna zip through, I'm running low on time. We have a grad student working with us, Derek, who is looking at sort of the anti-vax movement, misinformation, and networking from the 90s through to the COVID archive, or through to the 2020s. His biggest challenge will be to access and retrieve older work files from the Internet Archive. So we're kind of trying to work together with these large web scrapers with some of the tools and see if we can help him sort, analyze, and make available some of the information that he's digging into. So yeah, that's a quick blast through what it is that we're up to and how we're approaching some of these, I guess, bigger issues to do with rapidly moving situations and archiving them. So thank you.